English translation, 891st Contact Sunday, the 23rd of June 2024, 8:32 hours.
There you are already. Welcome and greetings. Nice to see you again after such a long time. What might you, Bermunda, Florina, and Injana be up to?
We are all doing well in every respect, and all three of us will also be coming here today, along with Asina, who you have been expecting for a long time. But also be greeted, and I thank you for your welcome.
Oh, that is very nice, and you surprised me with your news.
I thought you would be pleased, but you are not supposed to recall and write down the conversations you will have. According to the committee's advice, we have also decided that this should generally be much less frequent in future, so you should only call up and write down a conversation every month or 2 months, and only when it seems necessary. But that is not the case at the moment. All of the participants in the committee feel that, as an Earth human at your age, which is unusually older than your earthly age, retrieving and writing down our conversations and the resulting stresses and strains will be too much for you and put a strain on your health. This is especially because the foreign energies have become stronger, which Arleon and his extensive group have not been able to do much about so far. We have also established that it really has been the case for a long time that you are unnecessarily exhausting yourself, and that your health is suffering as a result. The committee also found that because
I've always managed so far. Besides, what you are saying is normal and nothing out of the ordinary. Every path that a human being takes ends somewhere and at some point, so they cannot go any further. Afterwards, a completely different human being tramples and builds a new path, which they then tread with renewed vigor.
that is indeed the case, but
Of course, and you know that as well as I do. That is why, when the end of the road comes, there is also nothing to complain about, and you simply accept that the end is now reached. But, as I see it, you are wearing a device today that I have never seen before. What is it, and what purpose does it serve?
I want to talk about that later when the time is right. But what I have to say about what we talked about earlier, this is that we have clearly recognized that you are becoming more and more troubled with your work, and that you are unusually burdened as a result of the negative energies directed at you and therefore hitting you. Your earthly age might not be causing you any problems, but we have been informed by our lion that the energies directed at you are now adversely affecting your health and...
Yes, that may be, and I can also feel it. It may be that I am losing a little, but I've already got a few years under my belt. I am getting older, and well, that is how it is. But it is the same for all human beings. But that does not mean you have to throw in the towel and give up.
What does that mean?
That I am going to carry on as before.
This is exactly what was considered by the committee, which is why it was decided, and the instruction was given to block everything from now on to the extent that your retrieval will be unsuccessful. However, this is not the case for this conversation, as it is still intended to clarify matters. Arleon also counsels you to take this time out because he assumes that the energies that have been paralyzing you at work and have also been dangerously attacking your health for some time are intensifying.
Well, that is not exactly pleasing. It seems a bit crass to me that I should be blocked. I do not think that is correct.
The committee's decision stands and cannot be changed, so it makes no sense for us to keep talking about it. But regarding there is still some explaining to do, namely what should be and what you should add in the future. So is what has been irrevocably determined by the committee, and you should now add to it.
Good. I will do that right away and wait. Yes, here. Dictate what I should write.
Here there.
That is all?
Yes.
In addition to what we were talking about earlier, I would like to say the following. You really should not give up, not even in old age, because life also goes on in old age, and it requires that you are active in some capacity. Being inactive because you do not want to, Because you are lazy. Because you do not want to work, or because a certain amount of money does not require it is commonplace nowadays. Because the majority of human beings have changed in a bad and negative manner and are no longer the same as previous generations. The majority of human beings today no longer belong to the righteous, hard-working generations of the past, who did not simply chase after wealth, pleasure, and the desire to be known in the world. Because today only pleasure, money, and therefore wealth is important to the majority of human beings, but also might, which is usually built on the insane belief in an imaginary god or on self-aggrandizement. Greed and worldly delusions, and which is fought out in war and terror with countless murders, immense destruction and annihilation. In particular, murderous machinations, terror as well as persecution and enslavement, rape, prostitution, and destruction of various kinds are again the continuation of what already happened in many earlier times. Thus, a large part of today's Earth humans has degenerated, which reaches high into the governments, politicians, and authorities, and causes the same lousy mischief in them as in those large parts of the populations that behave worse than wild animals. This is the case when these human beings indulge in their depraved pleasures, desires, preferences, vices, and degeneracies of all kinds without hesitation, destruction, and recklessness. This is contrary to righteous fellow human beings, nature and its diverse fauna and flora of all genera and species. The many depraved human beings do not think about this at all, but simply live into the day and senselessly indulge in what is currently slovenly, worthless, and simple-mindedly flitting through their crazy and uncontrolled lowly intelligent intuitions.
Yes, what you say actually corresponds to my thoughts as well, as it is generally held no differently here on Era, because here we do not know money and these rules, as well as not giving up work or simply employment after a certain age. In general, people continue to work or do other jobs into old age and not because of their age.
I also think that we call it retirement, after which a pension or retirement annuity is usually paid out to the retired person. In return, human beings have to pay a certain percentage of their salary to the old age and survivors or pension fund for the rest of their lives.
This kind of thing is unheard of with us. Also, as I mentioned before, it is not common for us that work is no longer done or no other occupation is pursued after a certain age. Even our oldest female and male persons are engaged in some kind of activity that is at least useful for themselves, or also for the community.
But that makes me wonder, what is it like when human beings are frail and no longer able to engage in any occupation?
Such a condition or similar conditions do not arise with us, because we maintain our health as well as our entire body and function throughout our lives so that absolutely no damage whatsoever is able to impair our health as well as the body and its organism in any wise. And the fact that this corresponds to absolute safety, which is effectively given, is also ensured by our technology, which is designed to immediately eliminate pathogens of diseases and illnesses, etc., that occur in nature before they can also affect a single person. However, we are susceptible and must exercise extreme caution when we are on foreign worlds. Because the pathogens that cause illness and disease are not eliminated by our technology there, if we are not protected by our safety suits, which is not always avoidable. However, in the worst-case scenario, we can catch a cold if we are not careful.
But what about when it comes to going out of the world, by which I mean, how is it that death also takes its toll on you at an early age? As I know, it also occurs when a human being is still young and not already well over 1,000 years old.
That is already determined by the basic disposition of the body organism, which is different from person to person from birth, and which determines how long, for example, the heart will remain fully and comprehensively functional. This predetermines the expected age of life, and if this is not avoided by life-prolonging measures when the calculated lifespan is reached, then the vital organs give up their energy and strength, such as the most important organ, the heart.
Speaking of the heart, here on Earth, Hearts are transplanted through surgery from human beings who have just died to other human beings if their hearts are weak or malfunctioning, etc.
With us, health medical measures are never carried out with regard to prolonging life, as is apparently practiced by Earth humans by transplanting the hearts of other human beings, as you said. We do not do this, because if this organ is no longer functional, then every person naturally allows death to occur and does not try to prolong life in any wise, such as through a heart transplant. We respect death and never try to prevent it if we know that the time has come sooner or later, which is usually when the heart stops working. This is determined from birth, and we live accordingly, but we do not and never seek to prolong life by trying to stop death and change everything by transplanting a heart. We would consider such an action to be unworthy of life.
My view is that a heart transplant is an act to cheat death, whereby in addition by replacing the heart, respectively by a heart transplant, the personality is also changed, and then a foreign soul beats in a chest, so to speak. I would also like to say that I think that death, as the normal last act of life, should be met without fear and horror, but with honor and dignity. This is also that it can be fulfilled and without life being prolonged by the insertion of a foreign heart.
I have nothing to say to that, for what you say is also our playar and posturing regarding death.
I already know that from Svath, because we have talked about it a lot. And I have seen a lot of deaths in my life, which I do not want to talk about, but found the respect, honor, and dignity that in living, dying, and death reveal their true sublimity, values, and greatness. But I do not want to talk about that. It would lead my explanations too far, and so my thoughts lead me further, namely to overpopulation. Since there are currently around 9.5 billion human beings on Earth, and so it is inevitable that doppelgangers of some persons will be born again and again. But as I have already been taught by Svath, this is completely natural, and therefore absolutely inherent in nature. Here in Switzerland alone, I have found 6 men in the course of my life who looked deceptively similar to me, although it turned out that there were always certain differences, so there was never an absolute and perfect doppelganger. There was always something anatomically, attitudinally, or psychologically, etc. different from me, so it was never such that one could speak of a perfect doppelganger. I also learnt from Svath that doppelgangers are born more frequently, and therefore appear, sometimes in several wise around the world, the more human beings overpopulation produces. And Svath taught me that these doppelgangers never, ever have anything to do with the erroneous, delusional and esoteric idea that certain human beings who had already lived once and whose likenesses were world famous, for example, would be reborn and live again. This, such as Anne Frank, President Lincoln, and various others, to whom doppelgangers are also born today in the 21st century, who are deceptively similar, but who have demonstrable differences, so that perfection of the doppelganger is never given or present. The personality of every human being finally passes away for all time after his or her effective death, and never continues to exist through rebirth or ever exists again. Whereby, however, during his or her lifetime the human being may deposit his personality energy, which is preserved for decades or millennia and even remains effective as a schema, or somehow acoustically. But his or her creation life energy escapes into its assigned energy level of creation in order to revive a new personality as consciousness after a certain time of processing. So this alone cancels out the crazy delusional idea of rebirth, that the deceased person leads a new life through a new birth in another existence. Every human being, as well as every life form in general, is animated by the life energy of creation allotted to it, namely by the fact that consciousness exists and is animated in every human being. But as a result of this, it becomes inactive and lifeless again, and thus extinguishes when the human being dies. Respectively, the body expires. In this manner, through the effective death of the body, the life energy of the creation immediately escapes from it again, which also extinguishes the consciousness after the actual occurrence of death in order to immediately flow back into its level of creation. This is in order to process the knowledge gained in the personality's current life, and to remain there for so long for the purpose of renewal that, After the duration of this processing, a new personality can be revived which no longer has any relevance to the previous and deceased personality. This is the process of life and death, whereby there is no rebirth, but rather a constant rebirth of life and a new existence and personality, as a result of which everything is constantly renewed and comes to bloom in life. As nature visibly demonstrates, since all plants release their seeds in one manner or another, from which, in the course of time and sooner or later, new plants of the same kind develop again, which are probably the same in sex or species as their mother-father plant. But in terms of personality is a completely new one, which no longer has any relevance to the mother-father plant, and only points to its origin in terms of sex or species.
It is amazing to me how you are able to explain everything so understandably.
That is my job. After all, Ansvath has taught me to always explain everything to such an extent that it can also be understood, of course, if it wants to be understood and is really seriously thought about. Unfortunately, this is often not the case because people prefer to indulge in religious, secular, or esoteric beliefs or other superstitious delusions. This is how much people prefer to throw to the wind everything that is predicted as a warning, such as what I had already reproduced thousands of times at school with the help of Pastor Zimmerman and Teacher Lehman, and then in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, and sent to governments, politicians, authorities, and the media, etc. worldwide. These were predictions that mentioned many things that would result from the sheer mass of overpopulation if it occurred and was not prevented by effective official controls. In the letters, I wrote that the breeding of an excessive humanity would destroy and annihilate the planet, nature and its fauna and flora, and that many things would be wiped out, also poisoning the atmosphere and destroying the climate. As a result, new diseases would emerge and enormous storms would begin to rage around the world, causing countries to become swamped and wreaking unparalleled destruction. Even the planet Earth will rebel, which has been largely destroyed, annihilated, and in some cases even wiped out, including all ecosystems and thus nature and its flora and fauna. This, through the direct or indirect machinations of the Earthlings, who numbered around 2.5 billion human beings at the time, and in just around 75 years from 1958 until today, the overpopulation has grown to an incredible 9.55 billion. In this short period of around 75 years, it has achieved what the planet and its ecosystems, as well as nature as a whole, have not been able to do since the Earth came into existence 5.5 billion years ago. Massive overpopulation has largely destroyed all ecosystems, and thus nature with its fauna and flora, and, with regard to the planet, has robbed and plundered it of all its resources in an incredibly irresponsible manner. This, while today and in the future, through the fault of the Earthlings, volcanoes will erupt all over the Earth and in the depths of the oceans, causing much mischief, and even the danger of a caldera going mad and becoming active is looming. And this will now also have an unpleasant and negative impact on global politics in the future, with many insurgent armed conflicts, wars, and acts of terrorism also breaking out and bringing suffering, misery, hardship, and death. And now comes everything that I predicted back in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, which were actually predictions and not prophecies, because together with Svath, I saw in the future what will happen and is now being fulfilled as reality, and in the future. But all the many thousands of letters that I sent all over the world, which were translated into English and French, and many of which came about with the help of Pastor Zimmerman and teaching laymen, were of absolutely no use, because I did not even receive a single reply, so everything came to nothing. Governments, the media, authorities, offices, and many others ignored everything, so nothing was done to prevent overpopulation or to protect anything. On the contrary, through their direct and indirect machinations, almost the entire planet and nature as well as its fauna and flora were largely destroyed, annihilated, and even wiped out. And at the present time, what I announced in my predictions is being fulfilled more and more blatantly, but the same is being done as was done in my lifetime, namely that all warnings are being negated and I am being slandered. Human beings who have learnt renowned professions and think that they have learnt a lot and important things insult and slander me, Call me a liar, a fantasist, a dreamer, a psychopath, a mental patient, an abnormal person, a storyteller, and much more. This is how it has been maliciously, hatefully, as well as slanderously put out into the world by Christian sectarians in my early adolescent years in Bulak, persecuting me all over the world and repeatedly trying to murder me, 25 times so far. Despite many witnesses around the world who have seen not only the Playar and beam ships, but also Svath, Asket,
You,
Quetzal, and Sim Yase with their own eyes, and a few have even spoken to everything is denied and slandered, and the witnesses are insulted as believers who are only deluded, fantasized, self-deceived, and deluded. All this in addition to the fact that, as my followers, they are hypnotized by me and so unteachable under my spell that they no longer have free will. And all of these lies, insults, slander, and other various types of offense have been spread throughout my entire life and are increasingly being spread again today. This is by persons who, because of their profession, think they are great, clever, smart, and knowledgeable, but who really know and understand nothing and are nothing more than ignorant little sausages. Unfortunately, this is because they are the ones who prevent humanity from finally becoming open to the effective truth and making it their purpose in life, which would finally bring true love, true peace, and real freedom to the world among earthly humanity.
Unfortunately, as we know today, that will remain an unfulfillable pipe dream for a very, very long time.
I know that, because the future showed me. But now, Quetzal, if you have enough time, I have these many questions here in this long letter from Alois, which I do not want to read out to you one by one, but only what is important and what I want to say in response. However, I would ask you to correct me if I answer something incorrectly, or if you think it should be answered differently. It is also desired that I raise these questions in a conversation with you or Ptah, or just give the answer. But now the question is, do you have enough time to be attentive when I deal with and answer the questions in this letter?
I do not lack time, so I would like to do as you wish. I also want to tell you that in the last 2 months, I have learned a great deal about our distant and most distant Playaran past, which has shown me things worth knowing that go back to the most distant times, up to 30 million years ago, so I can also answer your questions in this regard if you ask about things or events that fall within this period of time. So let us hear what answers you have to give.
That is good, because I have questions here that might also interest people other than just the questioner, like this one about the extent to which extraterrestrials would influence events on Earth. Of course, I cannot answer these, because I do not really know whether this is the case, and if it is, then I really do not know anything about it. Then there are many other questions that go far back into the past. But first this question here, which relates to the meeting of would-be world leaders who met on the Bergenstock and talked big and meaninglessly, to which I replied that this was effectively ridiculous and really nothing more than just a big joke by crazy rulers from all over the world, also from Switzerland, who wanted to make a big fool of themselves with stupid and lowly intelligent speeches and put themselves in the limelight. And the question of why our federal president had shamelessly embraced the war criminal Zelensky. I commented on this in the last Site Zeichen, Sign of the Times of June, and have copied it here for you to read again.
Billy's comment, "It is no wonder that there is no reaction in the federal palace in Bern, and therefore in the national government, when there are elements sitting there who are allowed to continue to govern with impunity, even though they are guilty of treason regarding the undermining of the country's neutrality, namely by adopting and applying sanctions from the EU dictatorship against Russia. This has resulted in enmity between Russia and Switzerland, which will be difficult to repair and restore the previously passable relationship between Russia and Switzerland. However, the unfortunate person who did this and made a mockery of Swiss neutrality in an evil and treacherous manner continues to reign in the national government with absolute impunity, instead of being dishonorably dismissed from it immediately. However, there are other elements who erroneously order that animals in the wild should be shot because they are supposedly dangerous for human beings and their sheep, etc. Because wolves, for example, snatch sheep from the huge flocks of sheep farmers who never get enough to earn money en masse with their sheep farming, regardless of the fact that the remnants of nature are made a pig of in the process. The fact that a federal counselor is helping out and demanding that the wolves simply be shot is probably the bottom of the barrel. The same applies to beavers, which are to be killed off, something that certain farmers are also in favor of. Just as certain sheep farmers are in favor of wolves and others are in favor of otters, because a certain federal counselor is also calling for this, which begs the question, why such idiots are actually elected to government, sit in it, are tolerated, and are not called to account, even though they cause such immense damage that not only jeopardizes the continued existence of nature and its fauna and flora, but also the existence, life, and safety of all human beings. And this is happening in the government, where the right is supposed to govern, and the people are supposed to be guided, and their lives and safety guaranteed. Regardless of whether it is in the Federal Council, the Council of States, or the National Council, such elements do not belong in government, because if nature is not finally protected and such elements, who make a mess of everything, are removed from office and replaced by rulers who finally protect nature and its fauna and flora, then they will disappear for good. Instead of these unfit elements in the government doing something to drastically reduce the scary mass of overpopulation, namely through a long-term and officially controlled birth control, it does not occur to those morbidly stupid and idiots in the government who prefer to exterminate and shoot wild animals that reason and responsibility are consciously and responsibly born and exercised. This, as other lousy elements of government, who do no honor to the righteous of those in power, as well as their spouse, stand aside and shamefully and unworthily break the word of honor of the pledge. But it is also a roaring ridicule and a true disgrace for the country that a Swiss female president humiliated herself after the international meeting of the leaders of around 100 states on the Bergenstock, whereby the meeting was really nothing more than a large-scale joke by lunatic leaders from all over the world to make a name for themselves with stupid and lowly intelligent speeches and to put themselves in the limelight. And first and foremost Switzerland, which has created enmity for itself with the insane adoption and application of the EU dictatorship sanctions against Russia, to shamelessly embrace the warmonger and war criminal Zelensky, which would probably also have happened if the war criminal Netanyahu from Israel had fallen into their hands, if he had also played a part in this alleged peace conference. What happened at the so-called "What is really true about the so-called family photo" at the end of the conference on the Bergenstock, in which the president of the Swiss Confederation allegedly shamelessly, stupidly, erroneously, addicted to prestige and pompously leaned out of the mass of the errant rulers in the photo in order to falsely make themselves appear as particularly highly praised in their simple-minded unimportance. It is not proven whether this photo was real when it was published on television, or whether it was a deliberate forgery and therefore a photo montage. I do not know. Either way, various foreign press outlets were quick to comment on it, expressing their opinions, which were shameful for Switzerland. But the people in the Bernese parliament did not seem to care, because as far as I know, no public statement on the whole ridiculous affair appeared to enlighten the public. Moreover, it must be said clearly and unequivocally, of the public media, there are very few in Switzerland and abroad that honestly dare to tell the truth openly and with absolute impartiality. The majority of the public media outlets, also here in Switzerland, are obviously completely politically dependent, and they rage viciously, slanderously, attackingly, and with bias against those states, persons and institutions, groups and associations that are not to the liking of politicians, civil servants, rulers, and the similarly minded rank and file, who come from all walks of life or simply have a different view, that is to say attitude, or are solely devoted to honesty and truth and feel obliged to do so. These mendacious public media, which are entirely dependent on politics and its wheel and woe, and usually carry big or otherwise well-known names, are biased in every manner and depend on being tolerated by politicians. And since the majority of well-known media outlets are dependent on being at one with politics, and thus on their partisan opinions, schools of thought and delusions, they also only publish politically biased news in their true reports. But as I said, these are effectively politically biased throughout and lack any neutrality, just as, on the contrary, any reporting should only be fundamentally and comprehensively carried out in absolute neutrality, whereby the human being reading the report would have to think for himself without a predetermined biased opinion and seek and recognize the effective truth impartially. All this with regard to the fact that the alleged peace conference cost millions of Swiss francs, which was pointless and supposedly a Ukraine peace conference on the Bergenstock, but in reality corresponded to nothing more than a farce, which ultimately has to be paid for by the taxpayers of Switzerland. The conference was effectively just a hypocritical and bogus peace conference at the taxpayers' expense, which was just a cat's paw game played by publicity-hungry people who pretended to be the rulers of countries from all over the world. It was not a peace conference, because neither the Russian war leader Putin, who is mad and vengeful with his army in Ukraine, nor the mass murderer and madman of Israel, Netanyahu, who wants to organize a genocide of the Palestinians for the sake of his inner ambition, which he is being helped to do by the lousy neo-Nazi rulers in Germany, and also by all the Letztgefederte leaders of countries, who see neither reality nor the truth, but which he will not succeed in doing, despite his madness. This applies equally to all those irresponsible governments, politicians and fellow howlers from the populations of around 50 countries who are supplying weapons and ammunition to the American-dependent clown and warmonger Zelensky in Ukraine, and who neither see nor recognize reality and its truth. They also fail to recognize that America, with its hegemonic behavior, is behind the whole war in Ukraine and wants to incorporate Russia and take it over freely with the possibility of the murderous organization NATO, which was of course founded by an American leader named Truman in order to get a little closer to world domination. Of course, neither the Russian and wrongdoing Putin nor the Israeli mass murderer Netanyahu were invited to the conference, nor were they present as representatives at this very expensive and pointless fun meeting. Instead, the warmonger Zelensky was present, along with all those who partisanly supply him with weapons and ammunition, etc., and are responsible for the fact that the murder and destruction in Ukraine continues and will not end for the time being. And the lowly intelligence suppliers of arms and ammunition to Zelensky do not understand that all the murder and destruction of the war in Ukraine is being controlled behind the scenes by America, which wants to bring NATO into Ukraine with all its nasty means in order to be next to Russia, and then constantly harass it and ultimately incorporate it into its hegemony. This, just as they do not think so far ahead that one day they must also expect to fall into America's clutches. Well, it was America that provoked the unsuccessful negotiations and wanted to bring NATO into Ukraine by all means, against which Russia, that is to say Putin and his cabinet, etc., fought back and led to Putin and his cabinet triggering the war in Ukraine. The war that has been raging there for years now continues to be promoted by lunatics and partisans, as well as idiots from the governments and fellow howlers from the populations of around 50 countries who are incapable of thinking, namely by supplying weapons and ammunition to the lunatic clown and warmonger Zelensky. This is in the interests of America, which in its hegemonic mania wants to devour the whole world and bring it under its control, whereby it has already brought around 40% of all states under its control. However, many of the peoples and the rulers of various states obviously do not care about this because they are all lowly intelligent and simple-minded and trust in the lying and deceitful regime of America, which is obsessed with world domination and are unable to think or act correctly themselves.
I am not yet familiar with what you have read out, because I have not yet read the Zeichen sign of the times.
You cannot do that either, because it is still lying dormant on my computer and is therefore not yet fully processed. But what I still want to say about America, how everything will ultimately look over there has been shown for ages by the behavior in the USA, which is teeming with lawlessness, abuse of law, and murders due to racial hatred, etc. Because there is truly no other state in the world recorded to have so many and such diverse terrorist organizations as well as other criminal organizations. Groups of all kinds of crime, murderers carrying out contract killings, political intrigues and drug trafficking, religious fanaticism and religious sectarianism, as well as associations for black masses, devil and satanic cults, pseudo-religious associations, associations with Satan, associations for near-death experiences, esotericism and occultism, etc. But what Alois goes on to ask here in his letter relates to Switzerland's neutrality, which was really made a pig of by an irresponsible federal council because these sanctions were adopted by the EU dictatorship and applied against Russia. The question is whether I could give a good answer as to what neutrality really means. I have written the following, which I may be able to use further if the opportunity arises. Because various disgraceful Swiss rulers obviously do not know what neutrality is and what value it really has, such as that they are committing treason when they violate neutrality and thereby make a mockery of it. In addition, as I see and understand it, such elements of treason do not belong in any government post, in a security service, in the police or authorities, etc. However, I would like to clarify the following about what is meant by neutrality, and how I learnt this at school, when the Nazi henchmen and SS murderers shouted near the Swiss border, "Little Switzerland, the porcupine, we will take it in retreat." Although these fools rejoiced too soon, because as we know, everything turned out differently than they expected. Switzerland's neutrality prevented our country from being actively involved in the war. However, those treacherous persons in the government and among the people, etc., who were born long after the World War from 1939 to 1945, and did not experience how effectively valuable neutrality was and still is, do not want to and cannot understand this. Swiss citizens who do not understand this, who think and act differently, such as that neutrality can be turned into treason, should give up their Swiss citizenship and leave the country. Such elements really do not belong in our neutral, peaceful Switzerland, and certainly not in a government office, where they are clearly still protected out of collegiality. But what I want to say now is that the mentally ill lunatics and idiots of both sexes, whether in Switzerland or in other countries, and whether they are government officials or ordinary citizens who are making a mockery of our Swiss neutrality, are unfortunately so full of imbecility that they do not know or understand what neutrality really means, and that it can also not simply be bent and changed at will by stupid lunatics and idiots. Neutrality is a Latin term from neutrum neither, which means that human beings and the state must be absolutely impartial and well-balanced in thought and action, so that absolutely impartial thoughts must also be cultivated in every case of conflict, and that there are no biased opinions, attitudes, or desires of this kind. This applies in particular to rulers and other politicians, but also to the people and authorities of Switzerland, which in 1815 committed itself to the impartiality of the state, and also remains neutral as a member of the UN. In its neutrality, Switzerland, its rulers, politicians, authorities, and population must never take a partisan stance towards anyone, but must keep out of foreign affairs and conflicts, which means that Switzerland may not participate in any manner in wars or armed conflicts of other states or sanctions against them. If this is violated, regardless of whether it is a person from the government or from the personality, then neutrality is violated and the state of Switzerland is betrayed, which is tantamount to treason.
What you say is unambiguous, clear, and unequivocal.
That is probably the case, but whether the traitors to the country realize this is questionable, because their sick brains are obviously not big enough to be able to really think, because their low intelligence is so immeasurable that even a single real thought would also tear their skulls into 1,000 pieces.
That cannot be changed, because that would only be possible if the Earth humans in question were to learn truly conscious, correct, and meaningful thinking.
Unfortunately, they will not, because on the one hand their faith does not allow this, while on the other hand their megalomania, their bossiness, self-importance, self-conceit, as well as their addiction to power and domination, etc., keep them so imprisoned and enslaved that hops and malt are lost with regard to improvement, as we say when something is impossible to do.
Of course, but I did not know that manner of talking, because that...
You must have forgotten it, because I certainly mentioned it once. But okay, then here the letter refers to what happens on television, and mainly, as it says here, refers to UFOs. The channels KB1 Doku, N24 Doku, and Welt Doku are said to broadcast many programs of this kind. This relates to UFOs, which is why people are asking what is actually going on worldwide in this respect, why the air forces of various countries want to hunt down and shoot down UFOs. But the public is also not being informed about this, nor about everything else that is happening in terms of UFOs and abductions by them, etc. And as for the question here about what the stories about the Pleiades and Sirius and the Anasazi really contain in terms of truth, I cannot answer that because I have never really looked into it. But I will answer this question here by saying that I explained a long time ago that the UFOs do not belong to Uplayaren, that it does not concern Uplayaren, nor that you also have one iota to do with it. And I would like to say explicitly that Uplayaren have not the slightest interest in coming into contact with these UFOs or their occupants in any way.
That is correct, because already since ancient times, and therefore since time immemorial, our most distant ancestors, who still called themselves Kakiar, have avoided to make contact in any wise with the beings of these flying apparatuses that have been appearing in Earth space since time immemorial, or to draw attention to us in any other way. This has been very carefully cultivated for around 25 million years, even by our very early ancestors. We Uplayaren, as we were called when we established the connection with you, have always been careful to ensure that our Ankar universe remains untouched by intruders of any kind, even when our early ancestors found the passage into this Dern universe. This was a decision of all our early peoples at that time, who were very widely spread throughout our universe and lived in discord with each other, but were nevertheless united in avoiding anything that would ever allow foreigners from the Dern universe to find a passage into our Ankar universe. All the constantly feuding and fighting peoples of all the planets, which today all belong to our Federation, agreed that feuds and wars should not one day arise with invaders from the Dern universe. Despite our own feuds and all the constant warfare among ourselves, it was unanimously decided never to do anything careless to such an extent that foreigners from the Dern universe should ever find their way into our Ankar universe through our carelessness. As was uniformly decided at the time, it was never to come to the point where feuds and wars were evoked that extended beyond our own Ankar universe.
Aha, and here I immediately have a question that was asked of me elsewhere, but which has nothing to do with these questions here, and which I could not answer. The question was, how long did it take after the sphere of peace came until peace was finally achieved more than 52,000 years ago? There used to be wars on all the planets of your present Federation, and there were even wars between the peoples of various planets, as I know from Svath. But I do not know how long it took after the appearance of the sphere of peace until true and lasting peace was finally established, which has now existed for more than 52,000 years among you and the entire Federation. I am aware of when peace really took hold, etc., but how long did it take after the appearance of the peace sphere until peace really and finally became a reality? I have not heard anything more about where this orb came from, so I assume you have not been able to find out anything yet?
That is correct. Our endeavors continue unabated, but so far nothing has been discovered in the more than 175,000 years that have passed since then. and the whole process since then. When serious efforts were made to achieve real peace, and until the final peace was finally achieved, took even longer than 123,000 years, as I know from our ancestral history. The human beings of all the peoples of our present-day Federation needed many tens of thousands of years, and thus 123,000 years, as I said, after the appearance of the peace sphere, as you call it, to transform themselves into really true human beings, which they also actually became.
Unfortunately, the humanity of Earth will not have that much time, for it will. But I am only telling you this, for Svath recommended that I keep silent about this until my final departure.
I was going to say the same thing about that, for it would be, but what I wanted to explain further earlier. Our early ancestors and all those after them from then on adhered much more strictly to the instruction that nothing was ever to be done carelessly whereby foreigners from the Dern universe could find a passage into our Ankar universe. This was because, as our very distant ancestors had already discovered and recognized, some of the foreign peoples were very unpeaceful, warlike, violent, and aggressive beings, in contrast to other foreigners who were more peaceful and balanced in nature. However, the foreigners of a negative nature, who also posed as gods and the like and were of different origins, have remained trapped in their attitudes to this day and have not changed for the better, as we can also see again and again at the present time through our explorations. In addition, the foreigners of various beings are so different in their attitudes, their habitus, and their aspirations that no comparisons can be made in a harmonious manner. Even in early prehistoric times, various of these beings, who were not peacefully minded, exerted such an influence on Earth that beliefs, violence, and anatomical changes were induced in early Earth humans through genetic and viral manipulation. In particular, negative and violent aspirations, ambitions, strivings, etc., were transferred to effective breeds through all the above-mentioned diverse manipulations of the beings of hostile and humanly deviant dispositions, as a result of which the negative dispositions already developed in early times, which continues to this day and brings a great deal of suffering and harm to their most distant descendants, and thus to Earth humans. This has in fact been able to continue to this day, leading to the unfortunate, malicious, and at that time pre-calculated enmity as a result of various fanatical beliefs among the worldwide majority of believing Earth humans. The human being himself is this highest might and alone determines everything himself, but is integrated into the laws of creation and its energies and powers, which are part of himself and which he can use freely at his own discretion and mold into what he likes. Consequently, he is free according to his own thinking and in every wise independent of the influences of any deities that is to say of beings who presented themselves as gods and allowed themselves to be glorified. They were only beings who secured their might by placing themselves high above their breedings and molding them into slaves, that is to say, slaves through various forms of faith, who as breedings submissively regarded their producers as gods in their faith. The various forms of faith, however, were created by manipulative genetic and viral means, and were also programmed for long-term effectiveness to such an extent that they were actually timeless. The impulsiveness of the forms of belief was so immune to this that Earth humans were not able to free themselves from them willingly. Consequently, they were not able to do so and are not able to do so even today. This is because it is a matter of a manipulated, genetically conditioned and virus-induced and moreover programmed compelling faith. This corresponds to a compulsion that cannot simply be released, especially not because the Earth human being bound by religious belief, which has been programmed and manipulatively controlled since time immemorial by the hostile and by delusional belief, has such an unbreakable effect that it binds the Earth humans to it, whereby the majority of them are trapped in a delusion and compulsion to believe in a worldly and also religious form, and are unable to free themselves from it, or only with extreme difficulty. On the one hand, this is related to the majority of Earth humans who, due to the abnormality of those negative-minded foreigners, were genetically molded in a human negative manner by manipulation and by certain viral influences, while on the other hand, the genetically peaceful beings did not transfer such manipulations into their breeds due to their humanity, but their number was only small, so that only a minimal part of Earth humans has developed in a human-positive manner up to the present day. However, this small part has always been unable to assert itself against the majority of the manipulated, believers and otherwise negatively influenced people, as a result of which the discord among Earth humans will continue to bring discord, enmity, a great deal of hardship, misery and suffering, many deaths, destruction, and hostility to life.
You are saying a lot of things here that Svath told me to keep quiet about for the rest of my life and never say anything about, which is why I think you are only mentioning it to me and I am just punctuating your speech, practically the whole thing, are you not? What Svath told me, I think.
No, I do not agree with that, for what I have declared shall be said openly for Earth humans for once. What instruction you received from Svath is probably not relevant here, but if you continue to follow his advice, then this is probably right and has its justification. However, this does not affect my explanations because they are based on what I have learnt from records and cannot be linked to Svath and his instructions to you. What I had to say and explain does not concern you and Svath's instructions, but only my speech and what I know. So you can rest assured, because you are not guilty of breaking a promise.
Good. I understand what you are saying and explaining, but, well, I will say no more about it and just continue to keep quiet and stick to what Svath has counseled me to do. This whole thing also has nothing to do with how it is asked here that human life developed on Earth, which originated about 45 million years ago and spread almost simultaneously worldwide, but not from Africa, as is always erroneously claimed by earthly sciences. How, when and what actually happened was something completely different from what scientists assume, because everything corresponds only to their conjectural assumptions and unfounded claims. I already know all this from Svath because he informed me about it in detail and precisely. I even came across a picture once in recent years that showed the very creature that Svath made me see in a pit in Germany, and explained to me that the first Earth humans had evolved from it. But these were then wiped out over time by the breeds, as you called them, so they did not simply die out, but were wiped out by them. But there is no point in saying more about this, because our bright scientists know everything better anyway, or at least they think they do. Svath used to say, "The wise are silent, and let the lowly intelligent speak." And he also said that an immense number of equally stupid people follow them because they are unable to think for themselves, but simply believe.
Unfortunately, that corresponds to the truth, but only those human beings are able to recognize this who are not believers in any manner, but are able to think independently and freely.
You are right again and hit the nail on the head. But I still have more questions in this long letter concerning the genders of human beings, male procreation, female childbirth, sexual orientations, respectively preferences, which are probably 1001, then homosexuals, lesbians, heterosexuals, hetero and homosexual, hetero and lesbian, and so on. Sexual masochism, etc. is also questioned. But in short, I was asked what it is like for you, Playarin, whether these forms or ways of having sex, etc. also occur and are given for you. The question was asked whether there is a third gender, as a crazy man from the music industry has recently been trying to have his gender recognized as the third. He is probably a zwick, as we say in the vernacular. A hermaphrodite, a human being who is both male and female. A hermaphrodite, a human being with intersexuality, that is to say, who has both male and female sexual characteristics at the same time. A pure hetero male is either male or female orientated, while a pure homosexual is only male and a pure lesbian only female. Then there are also forms in which sexuality is mixed, such as homosexuality and lesbianism with heterosexuality, etc. And when I look at and assess everything in this regard, I only recognize the female and the male, also in a dual, respectively bisexual sense, so I cannot recognize a third gender. I see and recognize this in human beings, also in animals, creatures, and all other billions of life forms of fauna and flora.
This also corresponds to reality and its truth, because in the entire sphere of life of all life forms, everything is naturally given so that there is only female or male. Whereby the forms of bisexuality, that is to say intersexuality, respectively hermaphrodism, are also part of this, which can be mated as well as copulating. Either way, only the feminine or the masculine can be expressed or come to the fore, whereby only mating or giving birth can be given, and absolutely no third gender is possible. So either way, a hermaphrodite, as you call it, is also always and in any case either purely male or purely female in an act of procreation or in childbirth. So consequently, there can never be a third sex, respectively a third gender.
That is exactly what I also think, because it would be completely illogical and would correspond to something contrary to nature and could never be. The human being who thinks they are the third gender is obviously not in their right mind because they are perhaps a hermaphrodite, and therefore of two genders. Either way, the feminine or masculine always comes into its own in the end. The assumption or attitude that, for example, as a result of being a hermaphrodite, a third gender must now be or be recognized, that not only shows low intelligence and therefore a failure to think in terms of reality and its truth, but also ignorance of the laws of nature, their existence, and their effects.
I have to agree with you there because denying this truth would testify to an overestimation and non-acceptance of actual reality and its truth. As you always say when something is absurd, namely erroneous. And I can only repeat that because the very idea of a third gender is irrational.
In my opinion, it is already delusional to talk about a human being something different and special, wanting to be or being supposed to be something other than just a human being. There is absolutely nothing to be gained from such an idea, because no matter how and what a human being is, whether rich or poor, good or bad, world famous or unknown, believer or non-believer, and whether a state leader or simple citizen, he is always and in any case nothing other than a human being. Only the effective truth is always correct and important, namely that the human being proves himself to be a true human being and not something else in degeneracy. But here in this long letter, the question arises again about UFOs, whether they really have nothing to do with the Plejaren. However, I have already answered this question by saying that you Plejaren really have nothing to do with them. Because when it comes to UFOs, you have kept so far away from them since time immemorial that they are not even able to locate you in any way. So no incidents of any kind, such as abductions, encounters with extraterrestrials, or simply sightings of UFOs, have anything to do with Plejaren beam ships? This, as above all, also has nothing to do with the so-called UFO incidents, and the incidents that occur in connection with earthly military and air force attacks. Only vague reports are published about the fact that these actually take place in various countries, whereby much of the truth about UFOs is concealed from the world public by the military, etc., because there is supposedly no public interest in it.
We have probably talked enough about this over the last few years, though I do want to agree with your words and confirm them affirmatively, that indeed everything you said corresponds to the correctness.
Fine, but I cannot answer this question here, because I am being asked what element 115 is all about, and also whether it is really suitable for sending UFOs hurtling through the air. I looked it up on the internet and found the following.
Element 115 is a pure substance that cannot be broken down into other substances using chemical methods. The elements are the basic substances of chemical reactions. The smallest possible quantity of an element is the atom. All atoms of an element have the same number of protons in the atomic nucleus, the atomic number. They therefore have the same electron shell structure and therefore also have the same chemical behavior. An element is designated by an element symbol, an abbreviation that is usually derived from the Latin name of the element, for example, Pb from lead, Fe from iron. The elements are arranged in the periodic table according to increasing atomic number. A total of 118 elements have been identified to date. Of these, the elements with atomic numbers from 1 to 94 occur naturally on Earth, albeit often in the form of chemical compounds and sometimes only in extremely small traces, for example as short-lived intermediates in radioactive decay. 80 of the 118 known chemical elements have at least one stable nuclide. Moscovium is an artificially produced chemical element with the element symbol Mc and atomic number 115. In the periodic table, it is in the 15th IUPAC group, and thus belongs to the nitrogen group. The name is derived from the Moscow Oblast, where the Russian Nuclear Research Center Dubna is located. Hardly any other element plays as big a role in computer games as element 115. It is used as a weapon, as a fuel for time machines, and is also said to emit gravitational waves. It is used to change the shape of gravitational waves.
Element 115. It is called that on Earth, but differently here. But we should not openly address this question in our conversation. However, if you wish me to explain more in detail, then I will gladly do so in a private wise, but I cannot openly express a position and explanation about it, and that is therefore.
Sure, I see. We can really talk about that in private. Now, something else in the letter regarding the fact that overpopulation is causing ecological destruction and devastation, affecting the entire nature along with its fauna and flora. I would like to say that it is extremely vital for nature, fauna and flora and all life in general that human beings do not steal even more habitat, and also that fauna and flora are not wiped out even more. What is being demanded in Switzerland with the shooting of wolves, beavers and otters by an insane federal councillor is so irresponsible and crazy that it should not be true all that a so-called father of the country can come into government and act criminally against nature. A federal councillor who wants to publicly enforce his thoughtless, destructive, eradicating, unequal and blatant hostility to life against nature, wildlife, and its continued existence, and who shouts his endeavors and thoughts in this regard on television. As a result, farmers and other landowners and watercourse owners are incited to relentlessly shoot down vital wildlife, causing what is important for the preservation of the vital nature of wildlife to disappear ever more drastically, and the meadows, floodplains, fields and forests, etc. to lose their vitality and die off. As a result of the disappearance and extinction of wildlife, nature as a whole withers away, becomes desolate and dies off. But idiots who understand nothing about nature and its living conditions do not give this a second thought, even if they call themselves federal councillors. The same idiots are all those who cut down good and vital forests, or scrub along streams and floodplains and meadow edges, which are vital for various wild animals and birds as well as rare flowers and other plants. Cantonal and municipal governments are particularly responsible for this, as they order this imbecility to cantonal and municipal workers, who then carelessly follow their instructions. In this way, nature, which is vital for all life forms, is being turned into sow, completely destroyed and annihilated, and therefore also for human beings. And this happens without a single penny of thought being given to the evil, destruction, devastation, and absolute eradication that is actually being done. In particular, those who should be responsible for this only have a big mouth, talk a big game, and refer to what they learnt at vocational school, etc., etc., etc. In reality, however, they do not even have a clue about what nature's ecosystems and their fauna and flora need in order to live correctly and survive at all. They are so lowly intelligent and therefore non-thinking, self-centered and completely out of touch with the future, that they even ban the planting of neophytes, which are also perfectly happy to thrive in foreign countries other than their original countries of origin. Neophytes, That is to say, plants from foreign countries, which, by the way, will take root and become native in Europe in the future as a result of anthropogenic, that is to say, human-induced climate change. Google explanation. Neophytes are plants that were directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously introduced by human beings after 1492, which is not true, because foreign plants were introduced much earlier. The year of the alleged discovery of America by allegedly Christopher Columbus centuries after the actual discovery of the continent of America, in areas where they did not occur naturally. The anti-neophyte idiots, who probably cannot be called anything else and who, in their stupidity and know-it-all attitude, cannot think beyond the end of their noses, are unfortunately particularly well represented in Europe and are working against nature and the laws of climate change, which is already taking effect and is already revealing the evil changes that the Earthling has forced worldwide. This is due on the one hand to the immense mass of overpopulation, and on the other hand to the destructive and exploitative depletion of planet Earth's resources. This, as well as the many and endlessly destructive and exterminating machinations regarding all ecosystems of nature and its entire fauna and flora. The fact that the idiocy of those who mainly exercise the might of the rulers is viciously destructive and annihilating is not accepted by the peoples, who therefore elect elements to their governments who know nothing at all about the protection of life in general, which is first and foremost the planet itself, its atmosphere, the climate, all ecosystems, human beings, and the entire world of nature and its fauna and flora. In Switzerland, these rulers are the majority of the Federal Council, the Council of States, the National Council, as well as many of the cantonal authorities, the majority of the members of the municipal authorities, and even their forestry officials and the experts of this and that, who should really do everything necessary in the great outdoors for nature itself and for the fauna and flora in order to ensure their existence and ability to live fairly. This means that everything should be protected and left alone from bad influences, and nothing should be spoilt, destroyed, or eradicated. However, exactly the opposite is being done against nature and its entire fauna and flora. Instead of returning everything to nature as quickly as possible, idiotic rulers and authorities are insanely doing everything that inevitably causes the opposite of what should be and become right. In addition, idiots and other lunatics and somehow disguised people, or religious sectarians or people who do not see the truth and reality, and other idiots demand that earthly humanity must endeavor to have more births, and thus more offspring. This is unparalleled idiocy when you consider that all the evils began almost 70 years ago with the breeding of overpopulation. Evils that today have a practically uncontrollable grip on planet Earth. All ecosystems, that is to say the entire natural world and its fauna and flora, as well as humanity on Earth in its insane numbers, more than just in a negative way, but in enslavement. What has been stolen from nature and all its fauna and flora by human beings through their overpopulation and irrationality, as well as through their destructive and exterminating machinations and greed, is indeed hitting the bottom of all barrels. And if everything that is evil, destructive, annihilating, and exterminating is not quickly brought to an end and transformed back to its natural state, then life will not be able to continue for much longer. The human beings' excessive overpopulation and all their manipulations and machinations are to blame for the fact that almost all of nature and its fauna and flora have been destroyed. The atmosphere has also been poisoned, and the temperate climate has been turned into a pig and driven to change. So first and foremost, humanity, that is to say overpopulation, must be reduced, and drastically reduced, which can only be achieved through a deliberate, long-term and officially controlled birth stop or reduction of humanity to a maximum planetary human population of 500 million in the maximum case. A maximum human population on the Earth should not exceed 1.5 billion. The further progressive destruction of all ecosystems. Nature and its fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere and climate, must be stopped as quickly as possible, although it will take centuries for everything in nature and its fauna and flora to return to normal.
There you speak a word that is not to be doubted.
Interesting. I would forgotten about that. Here, you said that Asina will be here today or so. They are still asking what the people of Asina call themselves. Do you know that?
Yes, the people are called Enzimoli, and we call them Dagos.
Dagos, that sounds like dragons to me.
But the name does not have that meaning because in our main language it means kind.
So something like the kind ones or something like that?
You can also understand it like that.
Then I still have the question from this very long letter as to what spirits are and what can be said as an explanation for spirits. According to my understanding, as Svath explained it to me, these are energies and forces that are deposited during one's lifetime, depending on the strength and intensity of the positive or negative personality energy. Depending on their strength, the energy deposits may also be measurable by equipment, both during life and after death, whereby they can remain deposited for quite a long time, even millennia, and can even be perceptible to human beings who are sensitive to them. Through occult machinations, drugs, alcohol, supplied gases, also earth gases or space gases, fear, various mental states or consciously used aids, etc., audible voices as well as visible manifestations can be evoked, such as so-called paranormal phenomena, forms of answers to questions, as well as shadowy appearances of figures, depending on sensitivity and expectations. This depends on the sensitivity and expectations of the occultists and interested parties, educators, etc., as they may experience ghostly manifestations and sensations of all kinds, including shuddering and fear, etc., however. Independent phenomena can also arise as a result of deposited energies, which are preserved for thousands of years as diffuse or condensed forms of phenomena. On the one hand, however, it is also possible for human beings who are still alive to produce shadowy or condensed phenomena through their uncontrolled thoughts, such as thoughts of memory or imagination, etc., which are then falsely labeled as ghosts by observers.
As Svath instructed you in this regard, it corresponds exactly to our findings and what I myself learnt and was able to verify through my own experiments. Since I have been stationed here on Earth, I have been living out my interests, including also the branch of spiritualism and occultism that exists here on this world, which many Earth humans believe in and are even delusional about. Such beliefs and delusions are foreign to us on Era, so I can only carry out the explorations and research I am interested in here on Earth.
Then you're in the correct place, because here on Earth it is teeming with occultists. Satan occultists, spiritualists, and other degenerate and crazy imaginations and delusions, for which there are even so-called scientific writings of these delusional beliefs. But I do not really want to deal with this nonsense here, because it is more important that I deal with this long letter, that is to say its other questions, such as this one, which asks what would actually happen if a war were to end. I want to say that peace after a war is nothing other than submission, but not freedom and peace, but enmity and hatred, which is what arises among the defeated people. Even if idiotic military heads and other like-minded people claim that victory after a war brings peace, this is an unparalleled lie. Because in truth only the weapons of war are silent, if they do not continue to fire underground. Because there is simply a state of cease fire enforced by murder and armed force, but not peace. This end of the war really has nothing to do with the fact that the victorious party is now submissively taking over the helm and determining the course of events as it sees fit. However, this does not mean freedom, but now dancing to the rules according to the new regulations and instructions of the war victors.
That is well explained and says exactly what reality is when not a stalemate but a winning party emerges from a war.
Stalemate. This is an expression used in chess. When one side becomes stalemate, it means that a piece can no longer be moved if at the same time the king is not in check. The game then becomes a so-called draw. If a player is stalemated, he or she is usually at a great material disadvantage, because chess is not usually played for fun and pastime, but for money, and quite large sums at that. If a stalemate is used in another form as a failure or nullity in politics, then the stalemate forms a so-called stalemate situation of what is being discussed or talked about. A conversation or a speech is actually always an inequality between human beings, in politics between two parties, where there is no agreement, and such an agreement cannot be reached, that is to say, no agreement can be reached and enforced.
Your explanation is good and unambiguous to understand. And I could not have explained it better. This also, if I was thinking of a war draw and not chess and not politics, when I mentioned the term stalemate. But the language and its words are to be used widely, and as I know you understand a lot more in this regard than I do, as German is not my native language.
You are good because mine is not either, but Swiss German is my mother tongue, if I may tell you that again. But listen here to what is further being asked, namely, whether Zelensky does not have enemies within his own ranks? Of course, he does, just as there are people in America who are against him. Despite the fact that the senile and doddering President Biden and his supporters back this warmonger, war fanatic, and arms beggar, which prevents the Ukraine war from ending and instead prolongs it. But the same applies to Putin, who has a radical Navalny group eager to get at him. Just as in Israel, there is a radical group of ultra-Orthodox who are waiting to send the mass killer and genocide perpetrator Netanyahu to the afterlife. But there are groups and individuals like this all over the world who want to get at other people because something about them does not fit in with their crazy pseudo-thinking. This was already the case when so-called America was mainly occupied by Europeans, who invaded the country, appropriated it, and slaughtered, murdered, and enslaved the natives and started long wars. The arms supplies to Zelensky and the related aid by lunatics and idiots of the governments of some 50 countries and their other partisan politicians and the lowly intelligent of the population do everything that the various factions of America's hegemonists want. First and foremost, the senile and decrepit President Biden, who in his low intelligence is not worth a shot of powder, as the saying goes, when a human being fails in every conceivable good way. In Ukraine itself, as I said, there is an underground movement against Zelensky, whose endeavor is to clear him out of the world, but because he is closely guarded, this has not yet been achieved, as Bermunda told me. So that is about that. But the next question is about something else, namely Antarctica, because it asks whether it has always been covered in ice.
What Bermunda told you regarding Zelensky and the underground movement actually corresponds to what really is. I have also investigated this myself, as I have also paid attention to all the hostile movements, which I could not simply ignore and which were frightening. But regarding the fact that somehow assassins sometimes find ways to realize their murderous desires despite the close and strictest protection of their chosen victims, that cannot be denied. Therefore, all those against whom assassinations are planned live dangerously.
I did not doubt Bermunda's words. But I can answer the question about Antarctica by saying that this was not the case. Because it was not actually covered in ice in the past, because Antarctica was once a splendid, flourishing continent, but I only want to tell you this.
That agrees with what I know from Svath's annals. Also that.
But all this, Svath said, should be kept quiet. He expressly insisted on that because he said that.
I am aware of that, which is why, after all, it is not to be talked about openly.
Exactly. That is why I will only put dots over what we said when I call up our conversation and write it down. But then there is this question here.
Are there still many?
A few more, but I would like to answer them. Like this one, which relates to the fact that it was only a long time ago, let us say prehistoric times, that huge shifts in the Earth's crust formed the continents that we know as such today. And I would like to answer this further question regarding creation and the universes as follows. Yes, our creation is roughly egg-shaped and contains 7 universes. However, they are separate and do not affect each other in any wise, that is to say, they do not touch or influence each other. Each of these 7 universes has its own dimension, which cannot touch the dimension of another universe, but has within itself the dimension of the present and countless dimensions of the future and past, whereby, for example, the human being, if he is in possession of the necessary technology, can travel into the past or future, and thus into another dimension. However, traveling to another universe of creation requires a much more futuristic technology that goes far beyond that, which is necessary to travel to any dimensions of the past or future, that is to say, a foreign present. The Pleiadian, If I want to speak of those with whom I am in contact and connection, do not only come from another future dimension or another past dimension of our Dern universe, as the Playaran call it, but from the Ankar universe, as they call it, which is another universe in the existence of the sevenfold universe realm of creation. The Playaran from the Ankar universe are therefore not time travelers from the future, present or past of our Dern universe, but time travelers from a completely differently dimensioned other universe of our creation, which comprises 7 completely differently dimensioned universes. The Ankar universe, from which the Playaran come to our Dern universe, is practically the same place as our Dern universe, only with different dimensions and somewhat time-shifted to our time. But this is so minimal that there is probably no need to talk about it separately. What perhaps still needs to be said about all this is that the so-called UFOs of the foreigners have absolutely nothing to do with the Playaran and are in fact also not in the slightest connected with them. The UFOs and thus the foreigners originate neither from the Ankar universe nor from one of the other dimensioned universes of our creation. But they originate solely from this Dern universe and the celestial bodies visible from Earth, that is to say, the worlds or planets orbiting them. That they even have knowledge of the Ankar universe, the Playaran and the 7 universe of creation is more than questionable, because as the Playaran fathomed, there was nothing to indicate that the foreigners were also even vaguely concerned with this. The extent to which the foreigners with their UFOs are able to manage their present by time traveling into the past or future, that is to say, to switch from their present to Earth time, also remains to be seen and is unknown to me. I think I have answered the most important part of this question.
I think that was detailed enough because more explanations on this would only bring new questions for you to answer again. And this does not correspond to what your work is about. Namely the worldwide teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life. However, all the questions that arise from other moments and which you are supposed to answer are truthfully not teaching-related and therefore unworthy in this respect, which is why you should not go into them in any wise and answer them.
I know that well, but I just cannot avoid digressing sometimes after all, and
which you should not do, though, because the teaching alone is important. But excuse me, please wait. This is a message that Injana is passing on to me via the station from the committee, which is listening in on our conversation. I will explain what is being said when unfortunately it is not exactly pleasant what I have to report, also everything that our lion is reporting, who is also present at the current meeting of the panel. Through this little device here, which you must have noticed at the beginning of my arrival, all your health data has been and is being transmitted timelessly via the station directly to the plenary meeting of the committee, which has taken note and decided that your health is extremely poor and that our conversation should be terminated. This instruction states that we will only resume and continue our conversations when your state of health is so satisfactory that we can resume our conversations with you without hesitation and without harming your health. Even if you do not let on, the device will record that you are experiencing dizziness and feeling unwell. That is why I am going to leave now and only come back when you want to accept my help, which you have always refused so far when your health has been affected. No.
You know I do not want any help, and I am sticking to that, because I do not want any more advantages than any other Earthling. And I do not want to argue with you about that because that is my attitude, and I am not going to change it.
Then so be it, and I respect that. Then I will go now, although I think it will be a long time before I can come back here. I will let Bermunda, Florina, and Injana know, but they will still be visiting you. So goodbye then, Edward, dear friend. But I do not know when that will be, and I have to abide by the committee's instructions. However, I am not forbidden, nor are Bermunda, Injana, and Florina, to call on you from time to time and keep an eye on your health, etc.
Of course, that could be the case. The whole thing is a bit abrupt, but I know take care. No more words are needed. And goodbye, Quetzal, my friend.